All right, we'll say good evening, Baruch Hashem. Today's Amud is Berachos, Daf Beis Amud Beis. We are picking up Emir Hashem on the bottom of Beis Amud Aleph. We left off 3 lines up from the bottom. So just to reorient ourselves a little bit, first of all, of course, we should have in mind that Emir Hashem, our learning should be a schus for the success of our holy soldiers of the Israel Defense Forces, and then the schus of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu give them the strength, the fortitude, the hope, and the optimism of Eretz Hashem to weather the difficulties of the coming days, and how we should be zocheh Eretz Hashem to the geula of Mashiach Mihir Rabbi Aminu. Amen. Well, say with that, let us begin. So remember again, the Mishnah introduced us to the concept of Kriyat Shema Shal Arvis, nighttime Shema, and the Mishnah begins with the discussion of Me'im Asai. From what time could we recite Shema? So I'll get quick chazar. The Gemara said, from what time can you begin to recite Shema? What did the Mishnah say? What did the Mishnah say? Tzeis. But remember again, the Mishnah didn't call it Tzeis. What did the Mishnah call it? Misha Shakohanim Nichnasan Lechol B'Truma. So the time the Kohanim go in to eat Truma. So remember again, we're talking about a Kohen who became Tameh, right? Then went to the mikvah by day, and then halacha l'maisa again needs herav shemesh, needs nightfall. Once nightfall comes, he is now tahar. He's now tahar. So halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah tells you that from Tzeisak Kochavim you can begin to recite Kriyat Shema Shel Arvis. Good. So now the Gemara picks up and says, V'ha kamash malon. By the way, there's another lesson that's taught us from the Mishnah. What's the lesson? Tekapar lo ma'akva. Now I will say, now this is actually very important. So let's take a typical case. A kohen becomes tameh. I mentioned this last time in passing, but there are 2 parts to his tara process, or 2 parts to his, we'll call it tara process. The first part is mikvah. Then, depending on the nature of the tumah, there's karban. The Gemara calls karban kapara. So remember again, so let's play this out. Let's talk about just the general 7-day purification process. So what that means is halacha l'maisa, on day number 7 he'll go to the mikvah. He go on the day number 7 and ultimately he becomes tahar the night of number 8, right? Night of day number 8. When does he bring his karban? The following day. What's interesting to note, the Gemara says, is that you're allowed to eat truma after having gone to the mikvah, even though you have not yet brought your karban. So that's what it means when it says over here, the fact that I didn't yet bring my karban does not preclude me. I'm not going to bring my karban until the next day. But yet the Mishnah says I'm allowed to eat truma already as of that night. So what do you see? You see from here that a karban does not hold me back from consuming truma. The pasuk says the sun will set. Vitaher. Now we'll say vitaher. We're going to see means and the day is over. So bias shemasho ma'akavto milachol b'truma. It's only sunset, but it really means nightfall that prevents him from eating truma. Ven kapar also ma'akvaso milachol b'truma. So we'll say. So again, we learn that from uba shemesh vitaher. At what point does the kohen become tahar? What point is he able to eat truma after going to the mikvah and experiencing sunset? Even though the next day, what is he going to have to do? What is he going to have to do the next day? Bring his karban, but still, again, the fact that he didn't bring his karban doesn't preclude him from going ahead and eating truma. Says beautiful pasuk or beautiful drashumimai. Dahai uba shemesh bias hashemesh v'hai v'tar tar yoma. How do you know uba hashemesh means that the sun has gone away, the sun has set? And how do you know taher means that the day is finished? Amud Beis Dilma bias orohu. Maybe uba hashemesh means sunrise. Maybe it means sunrise. In other words, maybe what the pasuk is saying is, Uba Shemesh, when the sun rises on day number 8, Umay Taher, Tar Gavra. Maybe it means that only when the sun comes up on day number 8, that's when the individual is tar. In other words, how do you know Uba Hashemesh? So, a very specific question. How do you know Uba Hashemesh means the sun will set, nightfall? Maybe Uba Hashemesh means the sun will rise. Now, if you understand Uba Shemesh means nightfall, then when could a kohen eat truma? The night of what would be day number 8. If you see Uba Shemesh means sunrise, when could a kohen eat truma? Sunrise of day number 8. There's a big difference. Amarava Barav Shila Imkain Lemakra V'Yithar. If that's the case, the pasuk should have said Uba Shemesh V'Yitar. The sun will rise and he will become tahar. My v'taher. What does v'taher mean? Tahar yoma. It means the day is finished. Tahar means like the day is done. The day is done. Kida armi inshi, as people say, i'arev shimsha va'ad kiyoma. The sun has gone down and the day is finished. So therefore, just interestingly enough, all going in what we said before. So remember, let's just rack up the facts that we have so far. Number 1, Kriyat Shema Shel Arvis. When do you begin it? One more time. When do you begin it? Tzeisa Kochavim. If you're a Kohen and you become Tameh, when do you go to the mikvah for your Tumah? Little Chazar, when do you go to the mikvah? On day number 7. When do you become eligible to eat Truma? Night number 8. When do you bring your Karban? Day number 8. So what we learn over here is the fact that I didn't bring my Karban doesn't preclude me from eating Truma. Good. Let's go right there. B'ma'arava, so we'll say in Eretz Yisrael, had Rabbi Bar Shila lo shmiyalahu. They didn't hear the statement of Rabbi Bar Shila, and instead, Hi, they asked the following question. Hi, Uba Shemesh, Bias Shmashahu, Umay Vitar Tar Yoma. So does Uba Shemesh mean the sun has set, i.e. nightfall, and Vitaher means the day is complete? Dilma, Bias Orohu, maybe Uba Shemesh means sunrise. Sunrise. Umay Vitaher, what does Vitaher mean? Tar Gavra. Maybe the pasuk means when the sun rises, the individual become tar. To which the Gemara says, "V'hadur pashlemi braysa mediktani bebraysa." So then they brought a braysa. But so what did the braysa say? This is actually interesting. Similar davar, say sakochavim. A way to remember what is uba shemesh. Ba shemesh means nightfall. Nightfall. Say sakochavim. Shmamina bias shemashahu. So Rabbi, you see from here, uba shemesh means the setting of the sun. Nightfall. Umay v'taher. Tahar Yoma. So both say, so the halacha l'maaseh now the Gemara closes out that topic and explains that Kohanim could go ahead and eat Truma as of night number 8. Right? The night of day 8. So they go to the mikvah on day 7, nightfall comes, Kohen is Tahar, he can go and eat Truma that night, even though he's not bringing his carbon until when? Till when? To the following day. Good. Let's go weiter. Amar Mar, Misha Shakanim Nichasan Chumasan. So remember again, the Mishnah said that when can you begin to recite nighttime Shema? From the time that the Kohanim go in to eat their Truma or Minhu. The Gemara asks, listen to this. We have another Brisa. Listen to this. The Brisa says, from when can you begin to recite Shema at night? Misha Ani Nichnas Le'echol Pito B'melach. From the time that a pauper goes in to eat his bread with salt. Now remember again, when does a pauper eat? When does a pauper eat? So Rashi points out something very interesting. He says, She'ein lo ner lahadik b'sudaso. The ani doesn't have a candle. So it's actually very interesting. The Gemara always understands you're always supposed to eat in a well-illuminated room. Why? It's actually fascinating. The Gemara says a blind person is never satiated. Why? What's the pshat? So Chazal understood that part of the eating experience is seeing what you eat. Like, this, it's interesting when you go to a restaurant, you have a nice dinner at home, and something is set up nicely. There's an enjoyment. There's almost like a culinary enjoyment in the presentation, even before you eat anything. So an ani, when does an ani eat? The ani is so poor, he doesn't have a candle. So when does he begin to eat? He already eats, sounds like before it says sakacham, even when there's still a little bit of light. So now both say, the Brisa says, when can you begin to say nighttime Shema? From the time that the poor person goes in to eat his bread with salt. In other words, what does the bread with salt mean? He has a meager meal. When does he eat the meager meal? Again, even before nightfall. So that's the time that you can begin to say Shema. So the Gemara says, now what's interesting, Ad sha'a sha'omid lipater mitoch sudasa. And you could say Shema up until the time that he finishes his meal. So this is interesting on 2 counts. Number 1, it's kind of making the time for nighttime Shema earlier, from the time he goes in to eat his meal. And it's ending when the ani would finish his meal. Now we'll say, Pashtas, when does an ani finish his meal? When does the poor person finish his meal? Says, you would think, like nightfall. So it's a much more limited window. So the Gemara says, Seifa vaday pligei masnisin. So the second part of the Brisa, which talks about the end time of Shema being tseis, certainly contradicts our Mishnah. Reisha milema pliga masnisin. So does the Reisha, or we'll say this idea that the time that an ani goes in to eat his meal, does that contradict our Mishnah or not? To which the Gemara says maybe not. Right? Milema pliga masnisin. Lo ani v'koin chat shiur. So the first answer the Gemara wants to give is that the time that the ani goes in to eat his bread with salt is the same time that Kohanim go to eat truma. That's what the Gemara wants to suggest. It's just 2 different ways of discussing the same period of time of Tzeis HaKochavim. That's what the Gemara now wants to suggest. Now the Gemara challenges that. Raminu, is that true? Is that true that they're really the same time frame? The Gemara says, Me'imasai maschilin. Likros Kriyas Shema ba'arvis. From what time can you begin to say Kriyas Shema at night? Misha shemenei adam nichnasin lechol piton ba'arve shabbosos. Divrei Mer. Both says great. When can you begin to say nighttime Shema? From the time that people go in to eat dinner on Friday night. Now, what's the chap over here? So if you look at Rashi points out over here that people generally go ahead and eat earlier on Friday night. Since again, people are ready for Shabbos, so you don't have to wait till later in order to eat your Seudah. So people eat the Seudah earlier. It's interesting. So when can you begin to say the nighttime Shema? At the time that people begin to go ahead and eat their meal on Friday night. Those are the words of Rabbi Meir. Chum say, Misha Shakohanim Zakon Le'echol B'Trumasan. Chum say from the time the Kohanim are able to eat Truma after going to the mikvah, waiting for nightfall. Similar davar, say Sakochavim. And when is that? That's nightfall. V'afa Pishein Raya L'davar Zech L'davar. And I will say, even though, now here's what's interesting, even though we don't necessarily have a raya, an explicit proof to this, ultimately, again, and I will say, what the Gemara is saying is like this. Even though we don't have an explicit proof that the day ends at Seisa Kochavim, at nightfall, what we call nightfall, the emergence of stars, we have a remez, we have a hint to it. Where's the hint to it? Here it is. Shnei Amar. So it's actually a beautiful pasuk. This pasuk is from Sefer Nehemiah, and what it's actually talking about is the construction of the walls of the second temple. About when they were working to build the walls of the second base of the. So watch this. So Nehemiah writes, "Va'anachnu osim b'malacha." So we worked. V'chatzia machzikim b'ramachim. Half of us were on guard duty when they were building the walls of Yerushalayim. So they had to guard still against enemies. So half of the people worked and half of the people stood guard. And when did we work? Me'alos hashachar ad seisa kochavim. Right? And when did we work? From dawn until seisa kochavim va'omer. And the pasuk says, "V'hayulanu halayla mishmar v'hayom malacha." And the pasuk says, nighttime we stood guard and daytime we worked. So Rabbi says, see from here that the definition of Yom ultimately again is dawn until nightfall, which means that by definition, nighttime is nightfall. That's the time the Kohanim could go ahead and begin to eat Truma, and by extension, that's the time of Shema. So the Gemara says, Mai va'omer, why do you need that second pasuk? Maybe at the end of the day, maybe sunset is already considered to be nightfall. And maybe from Nehemiah, I will say maybe Nehemiah, what they just did is they started working earlier, and they started ultimately again working earlier and worked later. In other words, maybe they started working before the day and continued working after nightfall. So Tashma, v'hayolanu halayla mishmar, v'hayom malacha. Ultimately, again, that's why the pasuk says, no, at night we stood guard, and by day, ultimately, again, we worked. So you see from Rabbi say, so what's the importance of this pasuk? This pasuk is the first time that we get a working definition of day and night. Right? Remember again, Nehemiah said, we worked from dawn, alos hashachar, until seisa kochavim. And then, right, that's it. So I should say, right, the first pasuk says that, yeah, we did malacha, we worked from alos hashachar until seisa kochavim. And then the next pasuk, Nehemiah says, we worked by day. So now you see, he defines what day is. What is day? Dawn until seisa kochavim. And therefore, again, kind of looping all the way back around, that's why, again, Kohanim could begin to eat Truma nightfall, after seisa kochavim, nighttime Shema, after nightfall. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Kasaka Laitcha. Now, based on what you said before, Da'ani ubnei Adam chat shiur. Now, we'll say, now, so I just want to point out what we have over here so far. We now have 3 opinions as to when you could begin to recite the nighttime Shema. Number 1, Misha Shakohanim Nichnasan Lechol B'Trumasan. From the time that the Kohanim could eat their Truma after going to the mikvah. Right, that's number 1. What was number 2? Ani. Time that a poor person eats his bread with salt. And number 3? Erev Shabbos, time that people eat their food on Erev Shabbos. So I'll say, so now what we know is, Kohanim, that Zman is Seisa Kochavim. Now the Gemara says something very interesting. He says, Kasar Laitcha, Da'ani ubnei Adam chat shiurhu. You might have thought that maybe the time that the poor person goes in to eat his bread with salt, and the time that people eat their Suda on Friday night, maybe that's one shiur. That's the same time. Maybe it's the same time frame. Vi'i amrit ani v'koin chat shiurhu. But if you say that the ani and the coin is the same time frame, so Chachamim Hainu Rabbi Meir, then the Chacham Rabbi Meir are saying the same exact thing. El Shmamina ani shiur l'chud, the coin shiur l'chud. Rather, see from here that no, they're not the same time frame. the ani is one time frame, and the kohen eating truma is a different time frame. To which Gemara says, lo, ani v'kohen chad shiur, not true. The time that the ani goes into eat his bread, and the time the kohen eats truma is the same time frame. However, v'ani ubnei adam lav chad shiuruhu, but the time that the ani eats his meal, and the time that people eat on Erev Shabbos, those are two different time frames. The Gemara says, really? Va'ani v'kohen chat shiuru, is that true? That ani and kohen is the same time? Or minu already is a kasha. Me'emasai maschin likro shma ba'arvin. From what time can you begin to say nighttime shma? Misha shekidesh hayom ba'arvei shabbosos div Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, from the time that Shabbos starts. Now both say, when does Shabbos start? When does Shabbos start? When does Shabbos start? Shabbos starts ben hashmashos, right? Really at shkia, really at sunset, because the moment you get after sunset, you're in the period of ben hashmashos. So Shabbos starts early, so to speak, right? Shabbos starts before it's definitive nighttime. Actually, this was the pasuk in Berachos, Vayechal Elokim bayom hashvi'i. Hashem stopped working on the seventh day. So Rashi says, the Ribono Shel Olam, who is exact and precise in time, knows the exact moment that the sixth day ends and the seventh day begins. He was able to work up to last moment. There are many people that think they're God also, like in this respect, right? Will literally, again, go up to the last moment. Not advisable for us, right? But Lamaisa, it's interesting. So therefore, Shabbos, we know we start Shabbos early. We back Shabbos up already again too. The truth is we actually back Shabbos up earlier. We start Shabbos 18 minutes before sunset. We're actually going to get it. We'll do that sugya as to why we do that. But Allah Lamaisa, the Gemara says, so now listen to this. So now another opinion. When is the time for nighttime Shema? At the time that people begin Shabbos. And when do people begin Shabbos? Essentially immediately after sunset. Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Yeshua says, in the time that the Kohanim could eat their truma, we keep seeing that over and over. Rabbi Meir says, wow. He says, from the time that the Kohanim go to the mikvah in order to eat truma that night. Rabbi say, when could Kohanim go to the mikvah to eat truma? When do they go? Anytime during the day. Now, he says, what he immediately means is, at the end of the day. In other words, he's talking about a case where a kohen would be going to the mikvah right before sunset. So that's pretty wild. So that's early. So that's saying you could already say nighttime Shema already when? Already before sunset itself. Okay? Amr Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, 1 second. V'alo kohanim ba'od yom hem told them. How can you say from the time the kohanim go to the mikvah? The kohanim go to the mikvah by day. Are you actually suggesting that you could say the nighttime Shema by day? That's preposterous. The Gemara says, Rabbi Chanina Omer, Mishasha ani nichnas lechol pita b'melach. Rabbi Chanina says, from the time that the poor person goes in to eat his bread with salt. Rabbi Chai v'amr le Rabbi Acha Omer Misha sherov b'nei adam nichnasen lahasev. You could say nighttime Shema from the time that the majority of people go in to recline and eat dinner. In other words, you could say nighttime Shema from the time that most people begin their dinner time. Their dinner time. Okay. V'amrit ani the kohen chat shiuruhu. Now, if you say that ani, the time that a poor person eats, and the kohen is the same time frame, then Rabbi Chanina, Hain Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yoshua saying the same thing. Ella, lav shma mina. Lav shmamina shiura da'ani l'chud v'shiura de'koyin l'chud. Shmamina. So we'll say, it turns out that what we at first thought was maybe just different descriptions for the same time frame is really not. There really are nuanced differences, or sometimes more dramatic differences between these opinions. But Allah Chalamai said they do refer to different times a day. So specifically, again, the time that the ani goes in to eat his meal and the time that the kohen goes in to eat truma, ultimately, again, are two different time frames. We'll just do a few more lines. So we'll say, which one is later? Which one is later? The time that the kohanim could eat truma, or the time that the poor person eats his bread? Mistabra da'ani mu'ocher. It must be that the ani is the later one. Di amrit da'ani mukdam, because if the ani is earlier, Rabbi Chanina hain Rabbi Eliezer. Then Rabbi Chanina Rabbi same thing as Rabbi Eliezer. Elav shmamina da'ani mu'ocher shmamina. It must be ultimately, again, that the ani's man, the time for the poor person, is actually later than the time for the Kohen. So the Gemara says, actually what we'll do is we'll stop over here for today. But again, what I just want to, let's just quick review. This is pretty good. Quick review of what we have. So once I say, remember again, we began the day, our facts, right? Let's just chazer everything we have so far. Right, a little bit from yet, we have 2 minutes. 2 minutes, quick. So we're going back to yesterday's daf. Why do we begin with nighttime Shema? Why not start with the daytime Shema? Shach b'chav kumecha and Vayerev vayvoker yom echad. So on and so forth. Right? Excellent. Good. Next. What is the time for nighttime Shema? Zman for nighttime Shema? Seis. But we don't call it Seis, we call it time the Kohanim eat Truma. If the Kohen becomes Tamei, when does he go to the mikvah? Which day? Day number 7. When does he become Tahar to eat Truma? Night 8. When does he bring Karban? Day 8. The fact that he can eat Truma before bringing the Karban tells us that kapar lo ma'akva. You don't have to bring the Karban in order to eat Truma. Allah l'mayis you're allowed to. Good. In today's daf, Rabbi says again, where do we see this from? Where do we see the concept that ultimately, again, that nightfall, right? Ba shemesh v'taher. So ultimately, and Gemara dashed in that entire pasuk. Fine. Then I will say we went on from there to discuss a whole variety of other different opinions. That halacha l'mayis. So again, essentially what we have over here. So we have the time that the Kohanim going to eat truma. That's number 1. Next, after that, we have the time that the ani eats his bread. What else do we have? What other opinions do we have? Time that ultimately, again, people eat on Erev Shabbos. Time that people start Shabbos, time that the Kohen immerses himself ultimately again in the mikvah. So again, at first we thought maybe these were all descriptions of the same time frame. Kamash malon, they are not. Now we're going to keep our eye on the ball because we know that halacha l'maisa, the definitive ruling, is the one espoused in the Mishnah, meaning that the time for Zman Kriyas Shema really begins the time a Kohanim could eat Truma, which is Seisa Kochavim, Elosai, Shkoyach. Incredible. Shkoch Rabbi Shmuel for the refreshments.